What's up, man? Hey, guys. Hope you guys are doing all right. So glad to be with you. Although it's a bittersweet day for us today. It's our last time, our last morning for us to spend together. And so, man, I've had such an awesome time just getting to learn about you guys and what God is doing in your hearts and in your minds. And I hope that if there was just a word or two that we've talked about in these morning sessions that have encouraged you, that have allowed you to learn something, I'm just incredibly thankful for that. But I also want to say that you all have encouraged me as well this week. And so I just want to thank you guys so much for your love, your grace, and your mercy. And I want you guys to give yourselves a round of applause because you guys have been absolutely awesome this week. So with that, let's open up to Psalm chapter 23. That's where we're going to spend our final morning together. And we are going to be looking at the last verse here in our passage. And so I'm excited for what God has in store as we wrap up. Our theme for today is the idea of pace. And our main idea that I want us to flesh out today is simply this. Jesus calls us to a slow and consistent pace. So in the military, you're required to do a number of different fitness tests. And so to complete these fitness tests, they want to make sure that all of their soldiers have the right amount of fitness to be able to go into battle and do a whole number of different things. But one of the requirements of this test is that you have to do a 2-mile run. And so you obviously take some time to train up for that run. It can take a while to get the stamina to be built up and the endurance. But you have to do a 2-mile run in order for you to complete and pass a certain portion of this fitness test. And so on one cold morning in April, we had the opportunity to take our fitness test. And obviously with soldiers, there's a lot of them who are awesome. They are just incredibly fit. A lot of them do CrossFit. They'll run marathons. They'll do a whole bunch of different things. And so you're kind of looking at all these different guys and girls, and you're thinking, all right, that one probably will do really well, or this guy will do great, and that girl looks like she's going to be pretty strong. And so you're kind of like looking at everybody and seeing who's going to do really well in all of these different events. So as I'm looking, and I'm looking across all these guys, I see that there's a gentleman there. He's probably in his mid-40s. And to conceal his identity, we're just going to call him Bubba. And Bubba is just an older guy, but Bubba is from Kenya. And so everybody's kind of looking at Bubba and saying, all right, he's kind of an older soldier. He's probably not going to do that great, but he looks to be a little bit in shape. And so all the soldiers, we kind of get on the starting line for us to do this little run that we're supposed to do, and we all take off. And as we're running, you can kind of see that everybody's kind of keeping pace, and everyone's kind of doing what they need to do. But then you notice that Bubba's starting to get to the front. And you're starting to notice that Bubba is like winning. And we're not just talking about he's a couple feet ahead. He's like a whole lap ahead of everybody else. And you're just thinking to yourself, holy, what did this guy have for breakfast? I mean, he is rolling. Bubba ended up finishing with an 11-minute 2-mile, which is very quick. Like, that's crazy. All right? Now get this. This guy he's in his mid-40s. He's got 3 kids. He could almost be a grandfather. And he's running 11-minute 2 miles. That's 5 minutes and 30 seconds a mile. That is quick, especially for a 40-year-old. So I went to Bubba and I was like, Bubba, I need to ask you, man, how in the world did you learn to run so quickly? And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, Lieutenant Jenkins, I learned how to run fast because I first learned how to walk. And I said, first learned how to walk? He said, yes, when I was back in Kenya at my village, I would have to walk miles in order for me to get water for my family. And then we would get the water, and then we'd have to walk all the way back. And then I started noticing that, well, if I was able to walk, then it actually would be better if I could maybe do a little jog, because then I could get there faster. And then as I jogged, then I just began to run. And then I began to pace myself. I started to not just run, but I started to time how long I was running. So then I would do 5 minutes, I would do 10 minutes, I would do 15 minutes. And then he said he moved to the States and he never stopped running. He said that he gets up every day and he runs for a certain amount of time. He doesn't necessarily run for distance, he runs for a certain amount of time. And so now he says that he can run for sometimes hours on end. And so to do a little 2-mile run for him was like waking up in the morning and eating breakfast. It was the consistency of his pace and the consistency of his life that allowed him to be an incredible runner. And so I learned a couple things from Bubba that day. The first thing is this, is that in order for us to be able to run, we first have to learn how to be able to walk. And in order for us to learn how to walk, we first have to learn how to crawl. And before we learn how to crawl, we have to learn that we can move forward in our lives. The second thing I learned from Bubba is this, is that when you learn to walk, we have the ability to go further than we could ever imagine. That when we begin the process to be able to walk in our lives, we can go as far as the eye can see. And then the third thing that I learned from Bubba was simply this. His consistent past shaped his persistent future. What Bubba was able to do in his past, the consistency of walking, the consistency of moving, has now made him into an incredibly awesome runner. And my hope and my prayer for us this morning is that as we leave MOVE, as we only have a couple more hours here at CIY, that we would learn to have a consistent pace of walking with the Lord. And my hope is that if we consistently walk with the Lord outside of CIY, then we will be great disciples, we will be great kingdom workers for the future. And so my hope today is that we can recognize the pace in which we need to be walking alongside with Jesus. And if we can walk with Jesus, then we will be able to do incredible things that we would never have been able to imagine. And my hope is that each and every one of you can have the opportunity to do that. To take what you've learned this week and to take it into your lives when you guys go back home. You see, when you go home, life is going to be difficult. You're still going to go back to the same parents. You may be going back to the same school, back to the same friends, back to the same life. And you've had an entire week to really not be walking with the Lord, but really be sprinting with the Lord, if we're honest. And so as we step back, the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what sort of things are we going to put in our lives so that we can walk slowly with Jesus? Our final verse for today is Psalm chapter 23. It says this, it says, "Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Let's take a look at that first part. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. What King David has recognized here is that he is looking back at his life. He is reflecting on the life that he's had, and he can say with full confidence that God has been merciful, that God has been good, that God has been with him the entire time. Now, what David doesn't say is he doesn't say that his life got easier. He never said that everything in his life sort of worked the way that it was supposed to work. We know that David had difficulties. We know that David had struggles. As a matter of fact, what we talked about yesterday, he said that you prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Just because David says that goodness and mercy are going to follow him all his life, it does not mean that the enemy is right there waiting for you to not realize that he is good. The enemy will continue to pound you, to go after you, to try to take you away from the moments that you've had here at CIY. But what David has done is he has embedded in his soul the idea that goodness and mercy are going to follow him for the rest of his life. For David, it was not something that he just learned. It was something that was deep within his soul. He said, I know that God has been with me. When I look at all the difficult things that I went through in my life, I can count the moments where God was present. I can count the times where God was there. When David had to face Goliath, he knew in that moment that even though he had this incredible giant in front of him, God was with him. When he decided to take a step of sin and sleep with Bathsheba, he knew that in the restoration process of that, in the repentance of that, God was with him. When Saul, one of his mentors, tried to go after David and try to kill him, he could see that God was with him. And y'all, for us today, the same thing that David had to deal with is true for each and every one of us. We may be going through something incredibly difficult, and yet goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of our lives. But the question that we have to ask is, do you actually believe that? Do you truly believe that goodness and mercy will follow you for all the days of your life? And in the midst of hardship, in the midst of difficulties, do you believe that God's grace can be able to cover the sin in which we have lived in? Do we recognize and know? Can we look at our past and say, man, my life has been tough, but I can see where God was moving. I can see where God was tugging on my heartstrings. I can see where God was wanting me to be closer to him. You see, for David, that's what it meant for him to say, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. David wanted that truth to be a part of who he was. It was the goodness of God that continued to propel David forward. He was able to look back at what happened in his life and say, God is with me. And he made a personal stand to be able to continue to recognize the goodness that God has. You see, I don't know about you, but sometimes when I approach life, sometimes it can be difficult for me to say, wow, my life is so horrible. Where is God in the midst of all of this? Where is God working in the midst of my life? When really I think what my attitude sometimes should be is, man, life is incredibly difficult. Why has God blessed me the way that he has? Man, I don't deserve any of the things that God has given me, and yet he continues to be good to me. The world is so messed up, the world is so twisted, and yet I still have people that I can rely on. Man, life is incredibly tough and incredibly difficult, but at least I have a sense of health. Man, I'm going through a lot of things, but at least I've got a roof over my head. You see, when we're able to look back and be grateful for what God has given us, it helps us to recognize that his goodness and mercy are with us wherever we go. Going on to that next part, it says this. It says, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So in this first part of this passage, David sort of looks back. He says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, because he's seen it happen before. But now David is going to look towards the future, and he's going to say, I get to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. What David is getting at is he's saying that eternity is coming. That there is going to be a day where every single person in this room is not going to be here anymore. And what David says is, he says, I get to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I get to be with the good shepherd. That I recognize that God has done so many good things for me in my past, and I get to look forward to the future. What David is saying is that the eternal is so much more than the temporary. The things that are happening in the future, the fact that one day we will be in eternity with God, helps us to live in the moments and in the times that we have now. You see, if you knew that you could live forever with God, if you knew that you could be with him in heaven, and that is an everlasting thing, that is an eternal thing, then what would you do with the time that you have now? Would you simply waste it? Would you waste it on things that don't need to be a big concern for you? Would you waste it on time that is not meant to be able to uplift other people? Would you use the temporary time that you have here to just indulge in the things that you want to indulge in? Take in the things that you want to take in? Gain as much things and bring in as much stuff as you want? Or would you want to live a life that says, I want to give as much as I can over to the Lord and to other people? Because I don't have a lot of time here. And I want to do as much as I can to help other people know who Jesus is so that they can be able to experience the eternity that he offers. You see, that's the key where David is getting at. For me personally, I'm missing my wife right now. I would love to be with her. As I told you guys, we're buying a house here soon, and it was tough for me to try to figure out the different things that are going on with us purchasing this house. And yet the reason why I'm here, why Joel's here, Jordan, Amy, the entire staff of CIY, why they come and invest an entire week here is because they realize that this here has the opportunity to shape and transform eternity forever. That because of where you guys are at, there are moments where you can make a step to follow Jesus and hopefully one day be in eternity with him. We come here to do those things because we believe that eternity is so incredibly precious. And we believe that for each and every one of us, when we decide to take that step to follow Christ, to be a kingdom worker, we're taking a step from recognizing that the temporary is important to moving into the spot where we say eternity is important. That eternity is our priority, that knowing Jesus is our priority, that placing our faith in him is our priority. And so for David, he just acknowledges, surely goodness and mercy, they followed me in the past. And when I look towards the future, I will be able to dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I don't know exactly where you guys are at. I don't know if this week has enhanced your faith. I don't know if it's decreased your faith. But all I want you to consider is simply this. What's the pace at which you're going to walk with Jesus? What's the pace in which you're going to take the steps to be with him? I want to give you just some quick practical examples of that. And then I want to encourage you to consider what it looks like to continue walking in faith. Here's a couple things to consider. The first one is simply this. Read God's word. If you want to take the step to be able to have a walking pace with the Lord, read God's word. It doesn't matter how much. It doesn't matter if it's for hours on end or if it's for seconds on end. But learn to be in God's word. Because then you'll learn more about who Jesus is. You'll learn more about who God is and how you can partner with God on the mission that he has for our lives. Number 2 is this: attend church. Show up. Be present. Have people know who you are when you go to your church. Be there with your friends, with your family. Decide to make it a part of your rhythm. For our graduating seniors, I've talked with you a little bit about this. Find somewhere to get plugged in. The third thing is find biblical community. Find people within your realm who will be able to encourage you and uplift you and continue to show you the goodness and the grace that Jesus has to offer. Number 4 is to serve. Serve within your church. Serve within the walls of your church. Be a greeter. Help out with the kids ministry. Serve on the worship team. Do those things within the church, but then even go outside the walls of the church. Go work with a local nonprofit. Go on a short-term mission trip. Take the step to be able to learn how Jesus can work through you within the walls of your church as well as outside the walls of your church. And then finally is give. And when I say give, I mean give of your time. Give of your talents. Give of the things that God has given you, the spiritual gifts that he's given you. And give of your treasures. Whether that's financially or whether that's because you've been blessed with something that you can be able to offer to somebody else. I think if you take these 5 steps, you can begin the process of walking with the Lord, of taking small steps to begin to find your pace that will hopefully allow you to continue to move on, where you could be running, sprinting, running marathons for the Lord. And my hope for each and every one of you is that you would consider what it looks like for the Lord to be able to do that in your own life. My hope is that this week you may have been running a lot. You've been learning a lot about who Jesus is. And now it's time for you to slow down and ask yourself, what do I need to do to be able to know who the Lord is and go at a walking pace with him? In 1 John chapter 2, it says this: whoever says he abides in him ought to walk in the same way in which he walked. You see, what the amazing thing about Jesus is that you never find a moment in the scriptures where he's running from place to place. Jesus is always walking from place to place. He doesn't run, he doesn't sprint. Rather, he slows down his life and he says, I need to just walk from one place to the next. And in our hurried, busy lives, I wonder if we maybe today need to just say, you know what, I need to slow down my life. I need to recognize what are the most important things in life. What are the things that will last for eternity, and what are the things that are temporary? And what can I do to focus more on those eternal things and focus less on maybe those temporary things? Jesus walked, and he walks with us. He walks with each and every one of you. And my hope is that we can walk the same way that Jesus walked, with the same slow and consistent pace. And one day we can dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me along the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I've walked through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, because I know that God is with me. His rod and his staff, they bring me comfort. He's also prepared a table before me in the presence of my enemies. He's anointed my head with oil, and because of that, my cup overflows. And surely goodness and mercy are going to follow me the rest of my life. And I can't wait to dwell in the house of the Lord forever.